Good evening, and thank you for making the effort to come out on a really, really uncannily warm September evening. Very briefly, just you'll see there's a couple of leaflets on the table. The next brunch is actually this Sunday, so we might see a few faces there. Trinity City Hotel at 12:30 until whatever time they kick us out. So just to introduce tonight's speaker, it's Daniel Agorander. 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 That's exactly what I said.
Yeah, right. So first off, since I'm actually here to talk about, for one thing, growing up Mormon, I just want to make one thing clear, since I've got the question five times already. That's my pint and my smokes are here. So no, I'm not a Mormon now. And well, reason I'm here pretty much is that I have one very bad habit, because I've got this one joke I always use to take over a conversation.
Only one?
Well, just one. What happened was, when I came over here, I went to an event with the Dublin Skeptics, and somehow the conversation mentioned someone having a lot of siblings, and this a lot of was something like 5 or 6, to which I went, I've got 14. And the immediate question afterwards is, huh? What? Why? And I go, well, I grew up Mormon. Oh, that explains it. And there's a lot of things with that always catches attention, and especially since usually I used to have to actually finger count when people ask, well, how many siblings do you have? I would go through, like, okay, so it's Thomas, you know, and eventually arrive at 14, which I think is the correct figure, as far as I know. And that also means that, like, Facebook is the best thing ever, because I don't have to keep track of birthdays. It does it for me. This is beautiful, because I've managed to get maybe a third of my siblings' birthdays into my head. One of them is sort of cheating, because it's my kid sister and she has the same birthday as I do. That's kind of easy. Now, I'm originally from Sweden. I moved here just a couple months ago, and Sweden is in many ways similar to Ireland, but it is also very different, and most notably, I'd say, in the look at religion, because Sweden is largely, I'd say, an atheist country. Depending on how the question is phrased, you'll end up with a quota of atheists around 85% as the high mark, although if you go for what we could call a strong atheist, that would be about 17 to 20%. Strong atheist there being like, you really have made a decision, you have thought about this and made a decision. But everyone else pretty much never thought about it, don't believe it because no one else did, so you never even get close to that circumstance. Which makes things a bit funny sometimes when you're actually growing up there as a Mormon, not just a religious person, as a Mormon. For example, the always coming question, well, how many wives do your dad have? Well, one, but he switches them sometimes. Now, there's also, like I mentioned, with me having pint, me having cigarettes, Mormons are often known for not partaking in things like alcohol, obviously, tobacco, hot drinks, as it's called, being like tea, coffee, although in my family we actually thought that herbal teas were fine, and black teas apparently are good for colds or something, but only strictly medicinal purposes. Happens. And that can lead to the funniest guilty pleasures ever, especially in the eyes of your friends, because your friends are going to a normal school, they will be pretty much atheists, and you got this awesome thing that you want to share with them. That's like, come on, dude, I found the most awesome thing, come on, let's do this. They'll just tag along. They think you probably have found a cigarette or something. No, you disappoint them a bit when you sneak out with the half-empty bottle of Coke. Like, yeah, wait, is this it? Yeah, it's cool. I found it in my dad's trailer wagon. It's awesome. No, it's not. And you also end up in certain collisions because obviously being very religious, we would always pray ahead of dinner time. But whenever I had dinner at most friends who were outside of the church, most of them, I would be this little pain in the behind and insist that we should pray before a meal because that's what you do, in my mind. But being a child of like 7, 8 somewhere, you're not always that good at like formulating a good prayer. So I was told, I don't remember it myself, but I was told like 10 years later by the mother of one of my friends that she had indulged me very patiently, allowed me to start saying my prayer. And I go like, Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us this bountiful food, all of that stuff, and thank you for making sure that the food is not poisonous. She was not happy with this review of her cooking skills. In my cooking skills, it would be perfectly legit. It's the only time I actually pray. Another thing that actually did not really feel that much like I'm different, I was just probably not old enough to really understand it, is that the whole science thing, where I actually have this sort of vague memory of explaining to a friend that no, Neanderthals are just humans with a disease or something. And it's kind of awesome when then the same age kid just goes, dude, did you not watch the science show last night on TV? That's wrong. And I had no idea what to say about that, so I just started watching the science show, so that worked. I also mentioned the whole thing with the polygamy thing that people always associate with Mormons. It's one of those I always get, like, did your dad have many wives? And that is actually very much a prejudice nowadays, because even the big church canceled this in 1890. They had a very well-timed revelation from God, because the United States federal government had outlawed polygamy, and the Utah territory wanted to become the Utah state. And to do this, they had to conform with federal law, one of them being the prohibition against polygamy. So God very timely speaks to the prophet and gives him a revelation saying that, dude, actually this whole many wives, one dude thing, don't do that anymore. And then they could become a state, and that's apparently nowadays when you read it, it's what God meant all along, but apparently got it across wrong the first time. Seems to happen a lot in religion, actually. And so that is actually, though, one of the things, like, if you are, as an atheist, trying to get into a conversation with a Mormon, like, for example, if you get the Mormons looking a bit like Connor there, but with the badge, the missionaries, I would actually suggest, yeah, there you go. Someone needs to find him a name tag as well.
My backpack's over there.
Excellent. No, you should avoid bringing up the polygamy question if you're actually interested in the conversation. Because as a kid, when I got that question, I just did not know what people were going on about. This was so far back in the church history that we were like vaguely aware that yes, there are some excommunicated subsects out in Texas someplace where they still do it. And everyone, even in the Mormon church, thinks that those guys are weird. So don't bring that one up because they'll see it as patronizing. And the same thing with the magic underwear thing. It's just not interesting, seriously. They will take it, well, I can actually explain what they are. They are what you get as a reminder about the vows you've taken when you get your temple recommends and are able to go into temple, which is different than church. And so it's not strictly magical. They are supposed to protect you from evil and temptation through like physically making it impossible for you to, or anyone else to see any part of your body. That apparently helps with temptation, I guess. But there's nothing strictly magical about them in that way. Not to check my notes. Now, one thing that might be helpful as well to understand is that when you classify what Mormonism is, it's very easy often to think of it as like there's Christians and there you have the Protestants, Catholics, and then Mormonism is somewhere on the side. That is also something that Mormons typically take offense to. The bigger church is actually called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The difference is in cosmology, basically, since they've got a heavenly father, God, and who has a heavenly mother. They decided in 1909 when they needed, for some reason they decided this when they had to make an encyclical about the view on evolution. I don't know. I have never managed to figure out why that was necessary for that. But the idea then is that this heavenly father and heavenly mother spawned a lot of children, for example, Jesus, us, and Lucifer. And after that, there was the plan how to reach like salvation. How do we ensure salvation for all of these spirit children, or whatever we want to call it? From there you get two plans. One given by Jesus, which is to basically send everyone to earth and have a veil of forgetfulness so they won't decide, and have a free choice and all of that stuff, so they can really make a good choice and decide either to follow God or not to follow God. And then everything will be nice-ish. Lucifer, on the other hand, he decided, well, isn't it better if we just force them? Then everyone becomes saved. Then it's fine. That was not fine, apparently, because it led to an actual war in heaven, where they decided to, eventually, they won the guys that thought Jesus was the good guy. And here is one of those delicious not things about the church, or church history, really. Because there was basically three camps. Jesus camp, Lucifer camp, the middle, who were sort of undecided. They got to go to earth as well, but they were punished for this through being born black. Ooh, yes, I saw someone say ooh. And that it was actually also leading to the fact that up until about 1978, blacks were unable to have the priesthood in the church. This was because they were not of the good spirit children something. Then they had another timely good revelation in time for the equal rights movements and stuff. God does this. He times his revelations very nicely with whatever changes in society and whatever the rest of society does with everyone else. At the same time, though, as this revelation was presented, the journalists actually asked the then president, which sort of like the Pope is thought to be in direct communication with God, well, will there be any associated change as well with female ordination, basically female priests? And I actually had to write this quote down because it's so beautiful. We do not expect any revelation about women and the priesthood. It sounds sort of like if you're talking about, well, what will happen to the interest rate? No, we don't expect to change it. But it's supposedly God and eternal truth and all of that. I never understood how people understand this. And I never understood how I saw behind it or didn't see it properly growing up, because it seems so simple. But you quote it in this circumstance you're used to, you just don't question it. When you question it, you end up here at an atheist convention. Now, things like the thing with not allowing female ordination, for example, that used to be a bit different in the early church. There is a female organization that I actually, well, I wasn't a member, so I forgot about exactly how it worked. I actually had to check with my aunt, who is still in the church. And it used to be, up until the mid-40s, that they would do the healing, you know, the putting on hands and praying to God and all of that stuff, which is almost like a priestly thing. So in the mid-40s, they decided that no, women should stop doing that, because women should not be allowed in healing, apparently. So they actually started, you could think, more progressive than they sometimes have been later, because that women's organization was one of the driving forces in the Midwest of the US when it comes to women's suffrage. That was something that, well, half of the Mormon church was highly engaged in. The other half were like, huh, what? How it goes? But then the United States as well does the Equal Rights Amendment, or plans to do it, which would basically give the same legal rights for women and men. Now this here, the church actually made some really interesting statements, as is usual for these things. For example, having women and men treated equally in law, they said would actually harm women. That's interesting, because it would threaten, in one part, there would be a risk of litigation. Well, I guess when people break the law, litigation happens, but not strictly a problem there, I guess. But also that, and this is another of those beautiful quotes, where it was the threat of having women's privileges threatened by this Equal Rights Amendment. Women's privileges were threatened by it, which is kind of delicious when you think about how this was handled in the US in the first half of the last century. There was, again, a female organization in the church who got very involved in this, and that did not end very well for them. Basically, they got excommunicated as apostates, which, sort of like in the Catholic faith, it is basically a you will go to hell thing, basically. And this has come up again lately in the church. One of the reasons why I've actually started getting interest in the church again at all is I have this aunt who is involved in the church, active, still believes, and I've started seeing a lot of what probably the main church calls feminist propaganda on it. Basically equal rights, but feminist propaganda. And back when I was in the church, at least the picture I saw there, and when I asked my mother about, well, why is it only the men standing up there talking? And she said, well, that's because God designed us for different roles. And so that was a bit, seeing all these things about the so-called ordained women organization and an old blog that is deliciously named Feminist Mormon Housewives. I actually ended up having to really double check this, and yes, the woman who named it was very much aware of the delicious irony here. It was one of those, she needed more than just feminist Mormons, and Feminist Mormon Housewives was a lot more fun. Out of that blog, basically, where they started writing anonymously, and then started writing with their real names when they figured out, okay, we're not going to get excommunicated immediately. Well, last year, they actually grew a bit bigger when a woman named Kate Kelly founded an actual organization called Ordained Women. Basically like, okay, let's take that last step and actually have women as equals in the church, which churches tend to have issues with. And she got about a year of this. In May, she was suspended from the church. Her temple recommends were removed, so she could not attend temple. And in June, July-ish, she was excommunicated as an apostate and spreader of false dogmas or false ideas, something like that. What always happens. But at the same time, this actually got the Streisand effect. They tried to silence her, like the leadership tried to silence her by first threat of excommunication and then actual excommunication. But the end effect was that just more Mormons got to hear about those ideas. Even ex-Mormons who did not really care that much about the church, like me, started hearing about it and wanting to read about it and see. Because when even an organization like the Utah Church has to deal with this issue, with people actually standing up for an equal treatment, that is at first a good signal for the rest of society that we're getting through even to them, which is kind of nice when we want to have a secular society that treats everyone equally. But also it has led to other denominations of the Mormon Church that are not part of the same actual church organization, like the Community of Christ, that do have already female priests, that do have one female apostle. They have 12 apostles at the top. That's a Mormon thing. You have a prophet / president and then 12 apostles and everything to make it look like Jesus. And they have gotten a bit more attention. I barely knew they existed before this, but they've gotten more attention because they already got this, and there's a big televised fight about women's rights and LGBT rights inside the Utah Church. And then it's kind of nice to know that even Mormons can have an organization that is sort of with the times. They might want to forget about the God thing, but they've gotten most of it right so far. And that is something we should be aware of when we see someone who is active in the church. And if we are interested in a secular society that treats everyone equally, we need to be aware that they actually might just be on our side in a lot of questions. Just not the God question, but they are probably, or often I'd say, especially if female, is my general idea, they are probably closer than you think. They are someone that we very often can work with. That's basically why we should be aware of them and not treat them like great comfort. Thank you.